Welcome to another episode of Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I'm speaking with Mariam Matin. She's an entrepreneur and founder of Forward. We started the conversation with just talking about her career story. So she started in the nonprofit sector. She's done her own ventures and worked at companies, and then she moved into for-profit sector. And she's really just a really interesting story from a career development perspective. But furthermore, she built this platform Forward, which is platform that was built to make hiring and job searching more efficient, intentional, and skill-based. So for both candidates and recruiters and companies. So we talked about that. We talked about generational shifts in the workplace, the social challenges faced by Gen Z job seekers, especially post-pandemic, and just the crucial need for mentorship and support as people start their first jobs and beyond. So we really talked honestly, openly about challenges in recruitment, challenges in job search, and just the different things that impact individuals and companies. So check it out. As always, feel free to comment, share, and come back for more. Thank you. Mariam, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too, me too. I'm always grateful when people introduce me to awesome people. And I think it was Rigen that introduced us to each other. So grateful
Yeah.
to him. Excited to learn about your entrepreneurship journey. Excited to learn about Forward. But take my audience back to kind of where it all started. I'm always curious, how do people start their careers? What did you study? What did you end up doing? And just give me like a snapshot of where you were and where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the invitation to share all this. So I think I've always had a fascination with entrepreneurship. Even as a kid, I was the eldest sister. I was always the eldest in the kids group growing up, and I was in charge of creating the summer camps and in charge of creating activities for everybody. So I always liked sort of building things. And I didn't really think of that as a career path for many, many years. I got to Georgetown University, which was my dream school. I was so grateful to be there, had a lot of fun, meeting not just the friends that I made, but really learning about how big the world is and how it is a space where there are so many different ways that you can carve your path. And so when I graduated, I studied econ and psych, and I always joke, I remember 0% of my economics degree, but I did apparently get one. So that's something. But after I graduated, I worked pretty normal, like corporate jobs. I started in digital marketing. I worked at like an ad agency called Undertone, which is a great place to get my start. Got to learn a lot about how sales teams operate. I got to learn about how you develop brands and how you develop websites and products. So it was a great place just to kind of learn about what the professional world looks like. After that, I got a job at Chase working on their product team, which again was a really cool experience because I'd never worked in such a big corporation. But between both of those roles, I found that I was getting pretty bored. Not because the jobs were necessarily boring, but because I hit a ceiling pretty quick in both of those jobs of how much I was learning. So I started taking on side projects. I got a certificate in UX design on the side, just trying to find other ways to upskill myself and to keep myself kind of excited. And then one day I got a call from one of my Georgetown friends, Phil, and he called me and said, I've been thinking about this thing. We're a couple of years out of school, and so many of our friends were really driven to build careers working in social impact, careers where they could be working on issues that they're really passionate about. But a lot of us got funneled into, more traditional corporate consulting, finance type jobs, which isn't bad. But now a lot of us are starting to feel that itch of, okay, now that I sort of am in the working world, I want to do something that gets me a little bit more excited and feels a little bit closer to my value systems. But it's really, really, really hard to figure out what does it practically mean. And there aren't a lot of resources out there for people to figure out how do I make that sort of transition. So what can we do? Like, how can we build something? Because, there are career centers on campus, or there are fellowship programs or volunteer programs. But if you are a young professional who wants to build a career doing good, there aren't a lot of programs or resources out there specifically for you. And again, focused on more sustainable careers where you aren't going to burn out after 2 years because nonprofits famously pay so little, which I could speak to forever, why that's a problem. But that's sort of where it started. We just had this conversation of like, there's got to be something we can do. So Phil, Bridget, our third co-founder, and I sat down and started putting together ideas. We started doing research. We started mapping out the ecosystem of where is there the biggest need. And we started doing research. We started compiling things. And we started with just building a website, the second day website. So we were doing it before work, after work, on the weekends, kind of on the side of our desks. and we had a lot of volunteers helping us. And the initial goal was like, let's just put together resources in one place so that if people do have this question of how do I build a more social impact career, we have a place to point them to. So we did that for several years and it worked fine. But we hit a point where we're like, okay, either we go all in on this or we sort of let it fizzle because there's a limit to how much impact we can have with doing this on the side. So
Hmm.
I took the leap. I said, okay, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to move back home because we have no revenue, we have no strategy yet. But I really believe in this idea that there is a way to better funnel top talent into these spaces that really need them. So it was the fall of 2019, and I moved back to Texas, and the pandemic hit. And Second Day actually really took off in that time. So my job was to build a revenue strategy because one of the things we found as a nonprofit is that it is a very long path to getting donations, to getting foundation dollars. And if you want to be sustainable as an organization, you need to build an earned revenue strategy. So that was sort of actually where I built my first business. And I built a B2B sales pipeline for the first time. I did a ton of outreach. We wrote contracts that maybe are a bit dubious now because we didn't know how to write a contract. But we started doing all of these things and building services and building programs and getting students access to paid internships and providing professional development coaching for them at the same time. And that was really where many of my years of my career went, is building up this business, getting people access to opportunity. And we sort of accidentally became like a talent matching program and agency for social impact organizations. So I learned a lot about the challenges that early career professionals are facing as they sort of get their start, but also that employers are facing when it comes to hiring and supporting early career talent. And so I think that really, really drove me and shaped me in such a big way because it showed me that I'm deeply motivated to help people build the lives that they want to live by bridging knowledge gaps and opportunity gaps where I can. And I did that for 4 or 5 years. And then we got Second Day acquired by another nonprofit called Progressive Pipeline. So they continue to run that program. But when I was thinking about what comes next, I was not really ready to go back into like a traditional corporate 9 to 5. Maybe one day I'll do it, but for now, that's not my plan. So I was like, okay, I still want to stay in the space of I've identified that there is a really big problem when it comes to how we hire, and not just how we hire people in general, but particularly folks who are just getting their start because they don't have the resume to necessarily be super competitive. They have never been in a workplace before, maybe, so there's a lot of knowledge gap there. And there is a fundamental lack of education, even if you do go to a higher ed institution, on how to navigate a job market that is becoming increasingly more complicated. And as a result, not only are young people suffering when they are applying for jobs, but employers are really struggling because they're getting hit with tons and tons of applications in huge volumes. We have the rise of AI application bots, which are really taking over. We have job boards that are poorly managed and poorly updated. And that is more the fault of the job board than the employers, in my opinion. And so we've created just a really, really messy system, and it's only going to get worse. So I felt like I have this unique experience of working with job seekers one on one for so many years and working with employers. I want to build something for them. And so that's really where the journey of Forward began. But it's been quite a winding path to get here. But I think my advice to people when they want to get started in entrepreneurship is focus on like where you get really excited and then really educate yourself on the audience that you want to serve.
Mm,
I think one of the biggest mistakes I see entrepreneurs make is they start building without actually thinking about the problem they want to solve.
yeah.
And so this has been a long journey to really identifying the problem that I am most drawn to in the complicated ecosystem of why is getting a job so difficult these days.
Yeah. There's so much there that I want to kind of touch upon. I want to take us back a little bit towards because I am very curious about like the nonprofit world. And just because I'm sure somebody who's listening to this was like, okay, I do talk to quite a number of people who are in nonprofit space and etc. We're like trying to build something. So when I'm gonna spend too much time here, but I'm just curious, like, what is it about nonprofit? Like, why is it that such important often work that is done by a lot of nonprofits, I mean, that is very poorly paid because the money is there. Like I think there's this misconception like nonprofit means no money, but that's not
Yeah.
always the case. Actually, there's some of the most well-funded organizations, right? So like, I don't know, and sometimes salaries are high, but it depends. But it's just like it's a weird space. I have all kinds of conspiracy theories about it. I'm not going to go into that, but I'm just curious, like you having been experienced in that space, what do you think?
I'm going to try and keep this answer short because I also have a lot of feelings about it. I think it's a very complicated set of reasons. I think one of the fundamental issues is that as a society, we don't place doing social good as being a priority. And we see this in like so many different realms of life, which we won't go down that rabbit hole either. But I think fundamentally, we don't prioritize doing good for those who need it the most. We are a society that believes that you should be able to solve it yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So I think that's like the fundamental layer. The next layer is that I have observed that those with money who do donate, who do hand out grants and checks and things like that, yes, they are giving that money, but I have observed a very deep distrust that their money is being well spent. And what I mean by that is if you are a nonprofit and you want to get foundation dollars from one of the bigger, well known organizations, there are a huge amount of restrictions that are put in place. So, for example, a very common thing is you have to have 5 years of audited financials, meaning you have to have existed for 5 years as a nonprofit and have like really well run financial statements for those 5 years before you can access those dollars. But as a nonprofit, if you don't have money, you're not going to exist for 5 years. Like that's just not going to happen. Um, so there is this really toxic loop you get caught in where it's like, well, you have to really prove yourself, count every penny, beg for every dollar, because I do feel that the powers that be don't trust nonprofits to know what they need. They don't trust them to be smart with money and all of these sorts of things. And so tied to that is that there's a lot of restrictions historically on even if you do get foundation dollars, how they can be used. And most big name donors don't necessarily like that money to go towards salary. And I think this is where the disconnect to me is really frustrating because if you're talking about ending poverty, if you're talking about addressing climate change, you're talking about access to education and healthcare, we all know these are deeply complicated problems. But if we are not willing to pay to have really smart people in the room and then stay in the room to address it, we're never going to solve these things. So we catch ourselves in this endless cycle of underfunding these organizations, giving them the bare minimum just to patch the band-aids on, and not actually give them the opportunity to address the deeper rooted issue. And not every nonprofit needs to, address the deeper rooted issue. I think there are important nonprofits that are focused on like helping people survive day to day. And even then, it's extremely, extremely difficult. And one of the things that's been most striking now running a for-profit is the tone around money is very different. So people are much more willing to write checks for me when I don't have a product that is fully proven go to market yet, or product market fit yet. I am so early stage. Like to me, when people are like, "Oh, are you looking for investors who'd be super interested?" I'm almost like taken aback and offended on my nonprofit side, where I'm like, we had so much evidence that what we did at Second Day was good, and we got turned down constantly. And now here I am with a product that hasn't been fully baked yet, that is just now going to market. And everyone's like, oh, let me know when we can write a check. And I think that's just bonkers. But I think that
Yeah.
is like one of the key examples of where I see the disconnect. And so what I tell nonprofit founders is like, keep in mind, being a nonprofit is just a tax status. So Second Day, as I said, was an earned revenue business. 80% of our income came from charging clients for our services. And a lot of people don't know that that's even an option to them in the nonprofit space. So I think sustainability, and having like a business strategy in the nonprofit side is actually super important and something I'm also really passionate talking to people about.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's pretty unique. I don't have as much experience in nonprofit, but it's pretty unique your experience, like that it's easier to get money doing for-profit stuff because of just this. And I think part of it's just people don't know like the ins and outs of nonprofit, and even as an investor, like what does that mean and so on. So I think it's just versus the for-profit, it's very clear. You know what I mean? Like, we're putting this much in, and hopefully we're gonna get this much out. So it's a risk you're willing to kind of take. So, great. Let's dive into forward because I mean, my audience knows I very much care about careers and how we find jobs and being, in recruitment space and all of that. I see this hands-on. I'll be the one first to tell you that, in the recruitment space, we know there are problems. We know we can do it. We know that there's got to be a better way to do things. But it's just like nobody has figured out that like yet. Like, what is that? What is that thing that we need to fix? I don't know. There's just so much we need to fix in the world of recruitment and how we find jobs and how we find candidates. I was actually just at a conference this week, and it was about future of work. And there was like a lot of tools that are being like products around like interview screening and how to get the best. And it's like I don't know if it's just taking the same monster but putting a different dress on it, essentially, like interview screen. So it's not solving the root problem. So talk to me a little bit more about, I'm sure everybody who's listening is like, obviously there's a problem in the job market. I think we can all agree in that. But take me a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think there are, again, so many layers as to what is going on. I think that part of it is that we have not put enough internal coaching with not just recruiters, but hiring managers, with C-suite, with everybody, all the internal stakeholders. We have not taken enough time to sit down and think about, okay, the world is changing very rapidly. Our businesses are changing very rapidly, which means the ways that we are thinking about who we need to hire, what makes for the right hire for us, how we communicate that, how we set them up for success has to fundamentally shift. And one of the things that's been really striking to me, this is just one small example. When I started working with hiring managers and recruiters at Second Day, when I would read job descriptions, and these were just for internships, these were, admittedly lower stakes job descriptions in a sense, but we would catch a lot of really weird errors. And we go back and say, hey, we noticed this looks kind of off. And they're like, oh yeah, sorry, we just copy paste a lot of our old job descriptions and like recycle them over and over. And I was like, that's wild. It makes sense. People are strapped for time. Like, we're sort of just constantly moving. But that to me is a signal that we have not spent time fundamentally reimagining, like, how do we write job descriptions? How do we name the skills that we are looking for in our next hire? Because the other thing that, like, we all know when it comes down to hiring, very often it's like, for lack of a better phrase, vibes, right? Like, we'll put a job description out into the world, we'll talk to candidates, but like, so often, right? You'll talk to someone, you'll be like, I know they don't check every box, but they have something special, and I love that, and I'm going to go for it. And that's not a bad thing. But if that happens so often, then again, it's like, okay, how can we better attract those kinds of folks up front and also give people who have the vibes advantage, air quotes, a chance at getting their foot in the door, right? And I think that the way we have built the recruiting process has been designed to reward people who know how to play the game, not the people who are the best fit. Because there are so many little things that you are expected to know as a candidate that are not clearly communicated. And that on the recruiting and on the hiring side, we assume is intuitive. So, like, I saw this post literally yesterday where someone was like, I don't know what it is, but when you upload as a PDF, you just seem more professional and I'm going to take you seriously. And I'm like, no one who, first of all, that's arbitrary. Second of all, like that might seem intuitive to you because you've been in the workplace for a long time and you understand the expectations of when to attach a Word doc versus a Google Doc versus a PDF. But if you are not in the working world yet, or no one has told you this, or you're pivoting into a new industry or whatever, you are going to be potentially discounted because you chose the wrong document format. Like no one tells you those sorts of things. So I think that's the other layer is that, we have set up a system in which so much lives between the lines. You have to be able to read between the lines of the job description. You have to be able to read between the lines of um, email etiquette and like how you communicate with your recruiter. I work with a lot of young people. I've been working with a stellar young woman this last week. She's preparing for a final round interview, and she's trying to understand like what is the appropriate way to send the email before and after the interview, right? It shouldn't be such a big pain point, but actually, for the role she's applying for, it does matter how she chooses to write those emails before and after the interviews. So we're coaching her through that.
Mhm.
But if you don't have somebody who can talk you through that, you're gonna, again, potentially get left behind. So I think there's like I think that's like the other piece that I think a lot about right now. And I think, again, that impacts people at every level of hiring, but particularly the folks who are earlier stage in their career because they have the disadvantage of they've never been in a workplace ever, or they've only ever had one job, or maybe they, worked in service industry for a long time and now they're trying to get their first white collar job. So I think that those are the themes that I see very often. I think there's a lot of other things I could talk about around like learning and development and salaries and all that sort of stuff. But that's the pattern that I observe most often, those two things.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I do quite a bit of career change coaching. So like that's kind of like a lot of my coaching practices, working with people who are like you described, like either they just, maybe they've just been at that one job for 10, 15 years, they just don't know how to play that game, which is crazy because it is a game. It's like does it have to be a game? But it is. And it's and having been on both sides of the aisle, so like obviously like I recruit and I work with ATS, different ATS systems and so on, and work with recruiters and agencies. And then on the other side, being a coach on that flip side, and also having been applying to jobs like in my life, right? It's like seeing it from, three different aspects is just very different. It's very disconnected. Again, I'm in a very unique position that I'm able to see across board, but when I talk to candidates, it's like, or whether candidates or clients, it's common sense things that are common sense to me, but they're not common sense to other people. But part of it is because they didn't realize that there's this game they have to play. And it's very discouraging. Another thing I see though, and I'm curious your thoughts, and if you have any like stats around that, maybe not yet, but um, I like one. I'll give you an example. We were recently recruiting for like a very standard role. We had over 800 applications, and only like 11% of those candidates actually qualified. And
Yeah.
like as a recruiter, that's my biggest pain point is like people applying for, they're not even reading job descriptions, So it's like, is it on the, like to your point, like job descriptions are just useless because like, do people even read it? And so as a
Yeah.
recruiter, I'm like, well, what's the point of me working on a job description? You're not going to read it anyway.
No, this is the most common pain point I hear in the market today from recruiters and from TA professionals is the volume piece. And to your point, it's not even just that there's huge volume, but the vast majority of the applications they're getting don't meet the baseline qualifications or criteria. So there's a couple of things happening here, in my opinion. One is because the market is so scary for candidates right now, their natural response is, okay, let me play the numbers game. Let me just put my hat in for everything that I see because you never know, right? And so you're right, they're not reading the job description super closely. They're not doing that. They're really coming from a place of panic and just throwing stuff out there. Then, because employers are getting flooded with applications, there is a slower and slower response time. Because I think one of the things that, again, candidates fundamentally don't understand is that there are still humans reading job applications. There might be some keyword search happening. There might be some of like these kinds of things that go on, but every recruiter I talk to is still looking at resumes. So but if you have like 800 applications you're going through, it's just going to take you longer to move through the stack. And then people get anxious. And like my research found that like it was sort of you hit that 1 week mark of not hearing back, it creates that sense of panic pretty quickly. And people again are going to start mass applying because they're like, I haven't heard back. I must have not gotten it or something has happened. Let me just like keep putting stuff out there. And it just sort of feeds that problem because they're coming from that place of deep anxiety. The other layer is the tech piece. So between job boards, creating like these easy apply buttons, LinkedIn, I'm looking at you,
Yeah.
and the rise of AI application bots, which again, I hear this story almost every single time I talk to a recruiter. Just in the last couple of weeks alone, I've noticed a huge uptick in people mentioning this, is that they are very obviously getting applications on behalf of people who did not write those applications, but have paid some service to just like spit things out. I spoke to a woman this week who was like, yeah, we had a SDR roll up and a very qualified attorney's application came through. Very clearly, they had paid some AI tool to like apply for them. And it wasn't even in their industry, in their field at all. So I actually emailed them saying, hey, just FYI, if you're using one of these tools, they are wasting your money because you just applied to this SDR role, which you probably don't want because you're an attorney. So I would say like it's both of those things combined is causing this volume problem to go up even more.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I want to dive into a couple of things. One, the AI piece, and then also the LinkedIn, because I think it is very important. Like, let's talk about LinkedIn because this easy apply, I don't think people understand. From what I understand, is that when you click easy apply, it doesn't actually make you apply to the job. Like, you still have to go on an internal website to apply. It's only basically all it does is goes into like a LinkedIn inbox of a recruiter, essentially. Is that correct?
My understanding, the way that I've seen easy apply buttons work is that it like populates information from your LinkedIn profile and sends something. Yeah, I don't know if it goes to the recruiter's inbox or into their ATS. I
Or
doubt it goes into their ATS because
That's what I'm
that,
saying. It doesn't go into ATS. Yeah.
yeah. So, and the other thing is like the with LinkedIn stats, a lot of people see those, 300 candidates have applied. What a lot of people don't know is that's 300 candidates have clicked. They have not necessarily hit submit on the application. So, I think that LinkedIn is really feeding the problem in a pretty big way. And it's extremely frustrating. So, I got a
It,
lot of beef with LinkedIn these days.
yeah. I mean, listen, I love LinkedIn as a platform, but I'm starting to see that they really need to address some of these things for sure. And then it's like every time, or like you'll see like the AI thing pop up, like if you're premium, like the AI, like use AI to tailor or and stuff. And I think this is where I have beef with AI a little bit. Like we forget how to think as individuals and remember that we understand our career, we know what we've done. AI can be like a tool to help you maybe like brainstorm some things, but don't completely rely on it. And I see a lot of people do that. And it's like every resume you get or every cover letter, I don't like cover letters because I think they're just I don't read them. Like it's very like we don't ask for cover letters in general. It's not something, we have different screening process, but it's like a cover letter's not going to tell me anything because especially if you're using AI, you're not even telling me your story. Like not really. Like it's a very generic write up about your career and how it fits with the company, and I think it's just BS.
Yeah, and my hot take is I actually love cover letters, but only if they're used the way that they are meant to be used.
Right.
Because to your point, most people, again, this is where there's a really big lack of education and a lack of like understanding of what what happens on the other side of my application when I submit. I think that like people don't understand the job of the recruiter, they don't understand the recruiter versus the hiring manager, they don't understand and it's not their fault. We've just no one's ever taught them, and there is no transparency there. So I understand why I see hundreds of cover letters that are very generic write-ups that are just basically repeating their resume saying, please let me know if you need any additional information. Like it is not additive.
Yeah.
I advocate for a type of cover letter that is much more additive and much more tailored and all of these things. But I can appreciate that like 99% of cover letters are not written that well. But again, this is where it gets so also subjective. But I think, yeah, I think that LinkedIn, people like to say that it's like, oh, it's a social platform with a job board. And I agree with that, except for as you and I were saying before we started recording, is that even the social platform piece of LinkedIn is starting to break down a little bit because there is so much like congestion and noise and spam that is
Yeah.
clogging up LinkedIn. So I am very curious to see what the future of tools like LinkedIn, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, all of these sorts of models do, because one of the bets that I would say Forward is taking bigger picture is historically recruiting has been like a numbers game. It's like, okay, let's get it in front of as many people as possible, get as many candidates in as we can, and then we're going to find the best one in the bunch. But now we've crossed a threshold of like, oh, the volume is so much higher than we've ever dealt with, and we're not playing a quantity game anymore. We're trying to get to a more curated, high quality candidate pool more quickly. And these job boards are not built to do that. Their whole financial model does not allow for that. So I am very curious to see what the future of these big job boards are in general.
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely time and room for something different, something more innovative, something a little bit more useful. Yeah, I think even like again, LinkedIn, it's I don't see anything innovative coming out. It's more of just read and like rinse and repeat of like every kind of like other things that are out there. Yeah, it's just and this is what I like. It's like we just have to do better, as a community of like in this space and recruitment and talent and stuff like that because we're all suffering from it. And it's not, and like I get it, business is business. You're there to make money. If it sells, why not? And there are a lot of these tools that sell, and it is what it is. But it's like, imagine if you could just have a tool that sells, but also a tool that's actually useful. So that you're not just using it for the sake of using it, but it's actually making your life easier as a recruiter. And there's not a lot of tools that do that right now.
And that's, I mean, honestly, very boldly, like what we want to do with Forward, right? So I remember one of the comments I got a few times when we were first starting is like, oh, you can't build a tool for the recruiter and the candidate. It's not possible. And I
Mm,
found that deeply surprising, and interesting and a little shocking that people would say that because theoretically, the candidate and the recruiter have the same goal. They
mhm.
want the right person to get the job. They want people to get hired. So the idea there, like, oh, you can't build something that serves both audiences was really surprising and I think very telling of how we've been building HR tech up to date. So that's just an interesting side note. But I can kind of speak to what Forward is trying to do, right?
Yeah.
So there are three pillars of what we have built this tool on. So it's a job matching platform. It's not an ATS, it's much more of like a sourcing tool. But the idea is there's three pieces that make it unique. One is really focusing on skill-based hiring. So we're particularly focused on non-technical jobs where there are a lot of transferable skills that are relevant. If you're getting, a sales job, a customer success job, marketing, operations, a lot of different types of jobs and experiences are relevant to those roles. So the job seekers create profiles that are very much focused on naming the skills and examples of when they've used those skills up front, um, making it easier for recruiters to be able to drill in and see who meets some of those baseline kind of experiences and qualifications. And the other thing that these profiles do is focus outside of just skills, but on sort of like lifestyle and values things. One of the things we know that makes a candidate successful in a role is if the company is a good fit. So, for example, if a candidate's like, for me, flexibility and work from anywhere is super important, not every company is going to be a good fit for you, but you usually can't really discern that until you're further into the application process. So, this is like the other kind of information we're trying to like front load a little bit, make it easier for both sides to be able to identify between like job and candidate. The
Mhm.
second thing is more education for the job seekers. I've said this like 17 times today, but like there's just so much fundamental knowledge that job seekers don't have, and that's making them less prepared for the application process. So when they come into an interview, our goal is for them to be able to better articulate their story, better articulate what they're looking for, what they bring to the table, better understand like the salary band, better understand their offer letters, all of those sorts of things. And then the third piece is breaking them out of that cycle of mass applying, which is kind of the biggest thing we've talked about, right? It was like the volume problem and just trying to sort through the mess. So candidates in Forward cannot apply to every job that they see in Forward every week. They have a
Mm,
limited number of roles that they can express interest in, which was one, to train them in being more intentional with where to focus their energy, but also for you as an employer, if you get a candidate through Forward, you know that they have read the job description. Because to your point, like, are people even reading the job description to understand what they're looking at? Yes, because they only have a few limited number of chips they can play in Forward each week.
yeah.
And they are actually really engaged in that role and will be responsive, right? And so we're excited about it because I think that that is the direction that we need to be moving in the way that we are reviewing candidates. We can't just get caught up on credentials anymore. We know that credentials are not the only way to determine if someone's going to be good at the job. We know the rate of mishire is still really high. That to me alone tells me the way that we are hiring is still super off base and going to get more and more off base, again, given how the market and skills are shifting really quickly. And I think this is also important because I genuinely worry that the next generation of our workforce is going to get left behind. There's a lot of chatter that AI is going to replace entry level jobs. I'm not totally sold that that's going to happen in as big and dramatic a way as people think, but I am definitely observing it, right? Like I do see there are less, and there is some data around this. There are fewer of these entry level jobs out there. So if we want, for the sake of the US economy, to keep people employed, again, we have to be rethinking how are we writing job descriptions? If everyone has to have 3 to 5 years of experience, I mean, millions and millions and millions of people are going to be out of work. And that is going to affect things on a much bigger level than just, your individual company. And then the last reason I think it's important is because I really believe that company culture starts with how you treat your candidates. And if you want to build a successful business and you want to build a successful product and all the things and make all the money, you need good people coming through the door. And as I said, the rate of mishire is still really high. And we know that. And we know so much time is lost in hiring the wrong people.
Mm.
So let's try a totally different way of communicating what we're looking for, evaluating candidates, setting them up for the interview process, and getting to that list of candidates more quickly and effectively. So that's sort of the vision for forward. So we'll see how it goes, but
Yeah.
that's what's keeping me really excited right now.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I wish I had that when I was coming up because, like in my career, because you're addressing a lot of the challenges that I've struggled with. I have a lot of different skill sets. I was not a person who, kind of have like, went to fancy schools or have all these certificates. Like over the years, I've gathered some, but I'm not a good test taker. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not, so I always struggled. Like I always have to, like, even though like I can do the job, I have the skills, but if you ask me in a multiple choice, I don't know. Like my brain goes, in gazillion ways when I see a test. And so it's very hard for me to like collect all these things. And it's like, and then I would always get beat by people that just have fancy degrees, but I could actually, on the ground, I could actually do more than them. And so, and I grew up very much generalist in my career because I would just acquire all these skills. So I think one, that's super spot on. And again, I think and I love it that the tool kind of allows the individual to write out where they actually use that skill, because that will also, again, force you to pause. And this is what I usually do, like in screen calls, right? Is like get to like understand, like, is that person just applying for the sake of applying, or can they actually do this job? And so if you're able to see it ahead of time, I think that's solid. So it sounds amazing. Yeah, I think it has, I mean, let me know when it's launched. I think you guys are launching this summer right now.
Yeah, we have a small pilot we're doing this summer. So if you are hiring for a 0 to 5 year experience, marketing, sales, ops job, like we would love to have you try it out. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, really, it sounds like a great product. And the part about young talent, from my side, because I do work with a lot of young talent as well, and do a lot of hiring for them, and I speak at universities, and I'm yes, I'm a little bit concerned around those entry level jobs, the roles that might be going out. But I'm a little bit more concerned about the social aspect of young people today, like the ability
me too.
to like manage change, the ability to, take feedback that might not be great, the
Yeah.
ability to, just put in the work. Like that's what, and it's a generational thing. I think Gen Zs are just more about, I want to live the way I live and I want to make money the way it works for me and all of that. But then there's certain realities about work that like you just have to actually put in the work.
Yeah, I totally see that and I totally hear that. And so when I was doing second day, I was working with college students from the fall of 2019 until the fall of, like, let's say, I think 2023, 2024, basically. So I saw the entire spectrum of pandemic kids. And there is a huge difference between the folks who graduated from college in 2020 versus the ones who graduated in 2024, 2025. The lack of social skills, soft skills that they experienced from being at home during those critical college years is staggering. Like, I mean, in how they emailed, in how they showed up to internships, in how they communicated what they needed, like there was just a huge difference. And we're talking of like 2, 3 year age gap. It wasn't how old you were. It was really that lived experience of, did you go through the pandemic in college or did you not? And I think that that is something that, unless you had a child who went through it, you went through it, someone close to you went through it, you don't know, right? And I think there is just this like, oh, Gen Z is entitled and they don't want to work. I don't think it's that simple,
Yeah.
because when I've worked with a lot of Gen Z, like I said, over the last 5, 6 years, they need some upfront support that I think millennials didn't necessarily need, because we had the advantage of like a more normal world we were living in, to be totally honest. All
Mm.
my internships were in person, like all of that. So I learned a lot just being around people. Um, but I've also observed that there is a unwillingness to teach and to mentor, right? And so, like, for example, I had a student once who was like, so do I have to like do interviews? Like, do I have to interview for jobs? And my gut reaction, of course, is like, what do you mean? Like, what is this ridiculous question? But I took a beat and I said, help me understand why you're asking this question. And then I discovered she had been so anxious about interviews that she'd been creating like these 20-page scripts, trying to memorize every potential answer for any potential interview question. And it was like breaking her. And I was like, okay, it makes sense now why you are scared of interviews. Let's talk about the purpose of an interview, what they're trying to learn in that time, and how you can be better preparing. And at the end, she's like, okay, cool, that makes sense. I can totally do that. Right. So I think we hear some of these questions and sentiments from Gen Z and we're like, want to write them off, but there's something deeper that
Mm,
they are asking and that they are struggling with. And I think there's also something really powerful they also bring to the table. I have learned so much working with Gen Z. They have pushed me to be much more bold in many ways, and to be much more thoughtful, and much more nuanced in how I work. And I think we can all really benefit, but because we are not willing to teach, we are all losing out. And the problem's only gonna get worse. So I think it's partly on them that they need to kind of like step up a little bit, but it's also as those of us who are hiring them and mentoring them and training them, we also need to be ready to do that work too.
yeah. No, spot on. Definitely a good perspective. And yeah, they do need that support. Yeah, when I mentor a lot of them, I do start to remember those things. I'm like, how was I when I was in my 20s? And I mean, for myself, like I didn't have a lot of support, honestly. So I learned the hard way. But only if I would have had it. And I think we just had like, I'm an elderly millennial. So I think we just had like different challenges, and then we grew up a little bit more rougher on the edges potentially. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of things that just were out of their control, and they do need that support. I'm a huge proponent of mentorship in general. So it's a good reminder to myself and my audience as well. So where can people find you? Where do you hang out at the most? If somebody wants to learn a little bit more about the tool or just connect with you, where do you hang out?
Yeah, as much as I have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn, that is where you can find me. I'm there every day, fortunately or unfortunately. So feel free to connect with me there. I share a lot of updates on what's going on in Forward behind the scenes. So that's the best way to get in touch with me for sure.
Sounds good. Well, Miriam, good luck with the tool. I think it sounds amazing. I hope it's going to be the one that's going to transform how we recruit, how we find jobs. I really think there's definitely something there, and whatever we can do, from a shift or a shift podcast or just my audience, please feel free to utilize us. We're happy to help.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time to talk about all of this, and look forward to continuing to engage with you and your community.
Thank you.